Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and tell us what city you're tuning in from. And hey, don't forget to give the story a rating from 0 to 10 when you're done. Hope you enjoy it. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom shimmered like a jewelry box that had been upended by some clumsy hands. Dazzling crystal chandeliers sent light cascading down onto marble floors that were so flawlessly polished. They mirrored the stems of champagne glasses and the glittering, sequined edges of designer dresses. In the corner, a live jazz quartet was laying down some low, sultry tunes, the melody floating through snippets of conversation about stock portfolios and summer getaways to the Hamptons. It was the kind of soiree where everyone pretended not to notice the metaphorical price tags that were still practically glued to everything, including the people themselves. Sophia Mitchell was standing near the dessert table, feeling every bit the fraud that she was. Her dress was a borrowed number from her roommate, a stylish black piece that fit okay, but didn't quite drape on her the way that expensive clothes seemed to just naturally cling to the women around her. The invitation to this charity gala had come courtesy of her boss at the magazine where she worked as a junior writer, a last-minute replacement gig after the senior editor came down with the flu. Cover it for the lifestyle section, her boss had told her. Network a little, and try not to spill anything on yourself. Sophia tugged at the thin strap on her shoulder and took a sip of champagne that tasted like it cost more than her monthly Metro pass. She had already interviewed the event coordinator and snapped a few pictures on her phone. Her actual job was already complete. All that was left was 3 more hours of feeling awkward and out of place. Her eyes scanned the room, and then they landed on him. Tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair swept back in a way that suggested either he was just naturally perfect, or he had an outrageously expensive stylist. He was wearing a black suit that seemed like it had been tailor-made directly onto his body, the kind of tailoring that just whispered wealth without having to shout it. His jawline was so sharp it could probably cut glass, and his eyes, even from that distance, had a cool, calculating quality to them. But what really grabbed Sophia's attention was the way he was standing, just slightly removed from the rest of the crowd. One hand tucked in his pocket, and the other holding a glass of amber liquid that he didn't seem to have any intention of drinking. He looked bored, detached, like he was just counting down the seconds until he could make his escape. And then it suddenly clicked in Sophia's mind. A terrible, mortifying misunderstanding that was about to change everything. She had overheard 2 women gossiping near the coat check earlier. "Did you see the escorts they hired for tonight?" one of them had asked. Apparently, some of the single women specifically requested them. Very discreet, very professional, just arm candy to help them avoid any awkward questions. Sophia took another look at the man. The slightly aloof expression, the impeccable appearance, the way he seemed to be waiting for someone. Oh God, she thought. He's one of them. Her heart started to race, not exactly with attraction, even though he was undeniably attractive, but with a wild, desperate idea. Her ex-boyfriend, Derek, was at this party. She had spotted him maybe 20 minutes ago, all but draped over some blonde in a dress that probably cost more than Sophia's entire car. Derek, who had dumped her 6 months earlier because he had said that she wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't polished enough, wasn't enough, period. The idea took shape quickly, recklessly. If she showed up with someone like that on her arm, Derek would see. Everyone would see. She wouldn't be the girl who didn't belong. She would be the girl who belonged with someone who looked like that. Before her rational mind could even put up a fight, Sophia's feet were already in motion. She crossed the ballroom with her chin held high, her champagne glass clutched a little too tightly in her hand, her borrowed heels clicking against the marble floor with a lot more confidence than she actually felt. The man didn't even notice her coming at first. He was gazing out one of the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline, his profile looking stark and beautiful against the glittering lights of the buildings. When Sophia finally stopped in front of him, he turned slowly, one dark eyebrow lifting in what seemed like mild surprise. Up close, he was even more devastating than he had been from across the room. His eyes were a shade of gray that reminded her of storm clouds, and there was a faint scar just above his left eyebrow that, for some reason, only seemed to make him more attractive instead of less. "Hello," Sophia managed to say, her voice sounding much steadier than she had expected. The man blinked. Hello. His voice was deep, smooth, with a natural authority that made her spine straighten almost instinctively. Sophia swallowed. This was insane. This was without a doubt the most insane thing she had ever done in her entire life. But Derek was across the room, and he was probably watching her at that very moment. And pride was one hell of a drug. I need your help, she said quickly, before she could lose her nerve. The man's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or just plain curiosity. With what exactly? Sophia took a deep breath. I need you to pretend to be my date for the rest of this party. Just for a few hours. I'll pay you whatever your rate is. Obviously, I just need. She hesitated, hating how desperate she sounded. I need people to think I'm with someone like you. The man went very still, his gray eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Someone like me, he repeated slowly. You know, Sophia gestured vaguely at him, taking in the perfect suit, the perfect face, the perfect everything. Someone who looks like they belong here. The corner of his mouth twitched. It might have been the start of a smile, or it might have been something else entirely. And you think I don't belong here? Sophia blinked, confused. What? No, I mean, you do belong here. That's kind of the whole point. She floundered for a moment. You're clearly very good at this. At what? Sophia lowered her voice, just to be safe. At being an escort. The word hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin already pulled. For what felt like an eternity, the man didn't say anything. He just stared at her, his expression completely unreadable, although something dangerous seemed to be simmering just beneath the surface. Then slowly, deliberately, he set his glass down on a nearby table. His movements were controlled, precise, and Sophia suddenly had the unsettling feeling that she had just made a tremendous mistake. You think, he said, his voice very quiet, very calm, that I'm an escort. It wasn't a question. Sophia's confidence started to waver. Aren't you? Another beat of silence. Then, impossibly, the man laughed. It was a low, rough sound that seemed to surprise him just as much as it surprised her. He shook his head, and when he looked at her again, there was something bright and sharp in his eyes that made her pulse kick up for an entirely different reason. No, he said. I'm not an escort. Sophia felt her face flood with heat. Oh God. Oh no. I'm so sorry. I heard someone say, and you were standing alone, and I just thought. She was babbling now, desperate to just disappear into the floor. I'm so sorry. Please just forget I said anything. She turned to leave, but his hand shot out, catching her wrist gently. His touch was warm, his fingers were firm, but not forceful. Wait, he said. Sophia froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She looked up at him, fully expecting to see anger or disgust. Instead, she found something that looked almost like intrigue. His gray eyes were studying her face with an intensity that made her feel completely stripped bare. Then, unexpectedly, his mouth curved into a slow, deliberate smile. It transformed his entire face, softening all the sharp edges and revealing a hint of mischief that Sophia hadn't noticed before. I'll do it, he said. Sophia blinked. What? I'll pretend to be your date. Just for tonight. His thumb brushed absently against the inside of her wrist, and she wondered if he could feel her pulse practically trying to escape her skin. Why? The word came out breathless. Confused, he shrugged. But there was nothing casual about the way he was still looking at her. Let's just call it curiosity. Besides, his smile widened slightly. This is hands down the most interesting conversation I've had all night. Sophia just stared at him, half convinced that this was some kind of elaborate joke. You're serious? Completely. But I have one condition. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. What? You have to tell me why you need a fake date so desperately that you'd actually proposition a complete stranger. Fair enough, Sophia said, even though her cheeks were still burning. See that man over there? The one with the blonde. She nodded subtly toward Derek, who was laughing way too loudly at something his date had just said. The stranger followed her gaze, his expression cooling ever so slightly. "Let me guess. Ex-boyfriend?" Sophia nodded. "He dumped me 6 months ago. Said I wasn't sophisticated enough for his lifestyle. Now he's here with her, and I just—" She trailed off, suddenly feeling completely foolish. "You wanted to show him what he's missing." The stranger's voice was neutral, but there was something in his tone that made her look up at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Sophia laughed, but it came out sounding hollow. "Pathetic, right?" The stranger's hand was still wrapped loosely around her wrist. He tugged her just slightly closer, his voice dropping to something that felt almost intimate. "Not pathetic. Human. We all want to be seen as valuable, especially by people who made us feel worthless." Sophia's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Who are you?" He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then smiled that dangerous smile again. "For tonight, I'm whoever you need me to be." And with that, he laced his fingers through hers and led her out onto the dance floor. The quartet had switched to something slower, much more romantic. Couples swayed beneath the chandeliers, their movements languid and practiced. Sophia felt her stranger's arms slide around her waist, pulling her close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive that instantly made her head swim. "You didn't tell me your name," she said as they started to move together. His hand was warm against the small of her back, guiding her with effortless confidence. "You didn't ask. I'm asking now." He seemed to actually consider this for a moment, his gray eyes searching hers. "Call me James." "Sophia," she offered. His eyes widened. "I know. How?" He nodded toward the press badge that she had tucked into her small clutch, with just the corner of it visible. "Sophia Mitchell, junior writer, Metropolitan Lifestyle magazine. You're observant. It's part of my job." "And what job is that, if you're not an escort?" James' smile turned mysterious. "He dumped me 6 months ago. Said I wasn't sophisticated enough for his lifestyle. Now he's here with her, and I just—" She trailed off, suddenly feeling completely foolish. "You wanted to show him what he's missing." The stranger's voice was neutral, but there was something in his tone that made her look up at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Sophia laughed, but it came out sounding hollow. "Pathetic, right?" The stranger's hand was still wrapped loosely around her wrist. He tugged her just slightly closer, his voice dropping to something that felt almost intimate. "Not pathetic. Human. We all want to be seen as valuable, especially by people who made us feel worthless." Sophia's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Who are you?" He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then smiled that dangerous smile again. "For tonight, I'm whoever you need me to be." And with that, he laced his fingers through hers and led her out onto the dance floor. The quartet had switched to something slower, much more romantic. Couples swayed beneath the chandeliers, their movements languid and practiced. Sophia felt her stranger's arms slide around her waist, pulling her close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive that instantly made her head swim. "You didn't tell me your name," she said as they started to move together. His hand was warm against the small of her back, guiding her with effortless confidence. "You didn't ask. I'm asking now." He seemed to actually consider this for a moment, his gray eyes searching hers. "Call me James." "Sophia," she offered. His eyes widened. "I know. How?" He nodded toward the press badge that she had tucked into her small clutch, with just the corner of it visible. "Sophia Mitchell, junior writer, Metropolitan Lifestyle magazine. You're observant. It's part of my job." "And what job is that, if you're not an escort?" James' smile turned mysterious. "Something far less interesting. Trust me." They turned slowly, and Sophia caught sight of Derek staring at them from across the room. His expression was somewhere between shock and something that might actually have been jealousy. A fierce sense of satisfaction bloomed in her chest. "He sees us," she whispered. "Good," James said. then did something completely unexpected. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear. Then let's give him something to really see. Before Sophia could even ask what he meant by that, James spun her out and then back into his arms with a practiced grace that made her breath catch in her throat. His hand slid from her waist down to the curve of her hip, possessive and confident. To anyone who was watching, they looked like lovers, like two people who just couldn't keep their hands off each other. Sophia's heart was pounding for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with Derek anymore. "You're good at this," she managed to say. "At what?" "Pretending." James' eyes darkened slightly, his voice dropping to a murmur that only she could hear. "Who says I'm pretending?" The words sent a shiver straight down her spine. Sophia tried to laugh it off, to remind herself that this was all just an act. But her body wasn't listening to a word she said. She was hyper-aware of every single point of contact between them. The warmth of his palm against her back, the way his thumb was tracing small circles against her hip, the solid strength of his chest just beneath her hand. The song ended, but James didn't let her go. Instead, he kept her close as they moved off the dance floor, his hand never leaving her waist. "Thirsty?" he asked. Sophia nodded, not trusting her voice to work properly. James guided her toward the bar, his mere presence commanding enough that people actually seemed to part around them instinctively. He ordered 2 glasses of champagne, then handed one to her with a slight smile. "To successful deceptions," he said, raising his glass slightly. Sophia clinked hers against his, her eyes searching his face. "This doesn't feel like a deception." James' expression shifted almost imperceptibly, something vulnerable flickering across his features before he quickly locked it back down. "No," he agreed quietly. "It doesn't." They just stood there for a moment, letting the noise of the party swirl around them, neither one of them quite sure what to say next. Then Derek's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Sophia?" She turned to find her ex-boyfriend standing right behind her, his date conspicuously absent. Derek's eyes flicked back and forth between her and James, his jaw tight. "Derek," Sophia said, actually proud of how level her voice sounded. "I didn't know you'd be here tonight," Derek said, even though his tone suggested the exact opposite. "Small world," Sophia replied. Derek's gaze locked onto James, and there was something undeniably aggressive in his posture. "And you are." James extended his hand, his smile polite, but definitely cold. "A friend of Sophia's." Derek shook it reluctantly, and Sophia definitely didn't miss the way that he winced ever so slightly at James' grip. "Funny," Derek said. "I don't remember Sophia ever mentioning any friends who looked like they just stepped right out of a cologne commercial." James' smile sharpened. "Funnier still, I don't actually remember asking for your opinion." The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees. Derek's face flushed, and his eyes narrowed. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but Sophia and I have a history together. I'm just looking out for her." James' hand found Sophia's waist again, a claiming gesture that made Derek's expression darken even further. "I appreciate your concern," James said, his voice deadly quiet. "But Sophia doesn't actually need you to look out for her. She never did." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Derek opened his mouth, then quickly closed it again. He looked at Sophia, and there was something almost pleading in his eyes. "Soph, come on. This guy? Really?" Sophia felt James tense up just slightly beside her, his hand tightening fractionally on her waist. But before he could say anything, Sophia stepped forward, her voice sounding steady and clear. "Yes, Derek. Really. This guy who, in the last hour, has actually shown me more respect and attention than you managed to show me in 2 years. This guy who doesn't make me feel like I need to apologize for even existing. So yes, really." Derek's face went from red to nearly purple. His mouth opened and closed a few times, like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he spat out, "You'll regret this," then turned on his heel and stalked away, nearly colliding with a waiter who was carrying a tray full of canapes. The second he was gone, Sophia let out a breath that she hadn't even realized she had been holding in. Her hands were actually shaking. That was... She started to say, then just laughed, although it sounded a bit hysterical. Oh my God. I can't believe I just did that. James turned her to face him, his hands gently resting on her shoulders, his expression serious. You were magnificent. Sophia looked up at him, her eyes suddenly burning with completely unexpected tears. I've wanted to say that to him for 6 months. You just gave me the courage to actually do it. Thank you. Something shifted in James' face. His hands slid from her shoulders down her arms, his touch light and gentle. Sophia, He hesitated, seeming to struggle with something. Then his phone buzzed loudly. He pulled it out of his pocket, glanced down at the screen, and his entire expression seemed to shutter closed. I'm sorry, he said. I have to take this. It's important. He stepped away before she could even respond, moving toward the balcony doors with the phone already pressed to his ear. Sophia watched him go, suddenly feeling incredibly bereft. The party was still swirling around her, but she felt somehow separated from it now, like she had stepped out of a protective bubble and couldn't quite figure out how to get back inside. An older woman appeared at her elbow, elegant, with silver hair twisted into an elaborate updo. Excuse me, dear, the woman said, her voice cultured and curious. That man you were just dancing with? Do you happen to know who he is? Sophia blinked. He said his name was James. Why? The woman's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose dramatically. James? How charmingly modest. She leaned in conspiratorially. That's James Ashford. As in Ashford Technologies. As in the billionaire who just bought out half of Silicon Valley. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sophia grabbed the edge of the bar just to steady herself. What? Oh, yes. The woman continued, completely oblivious to Sophia's obvious shock. Quite the eligible bachelor, although he's notoriously private. Absolutely hates these events, from what I understand. His sister usually has to drag him to them kicking and screaming. Apparently, she's on the charity board. Sophia just couldn't seem to catch her breath. Billionaire. He was a billionaire. And she had just asked him, oh God, she had actually asked him if he was an escort. She had even offered to pay him. Heat flooded her face, then drained away, leaving her cold and shaking. The woman was still talking, something about Ashford Technologies' latest acquisition, but Sophia wasn't even listening. She just needed to leave. Right now. Before James Ashford came back and she was forced to face the full weight of her mortifying humiliation. She set her champagne glass down on the bar with a slight clatter and headed straight for the exit, her borrowed heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. She had almost made it to the coat check and was already fumbling for her ticket when a hand suddenly caught her arm. Leaving without even saying goodbye? James' voice was quiet, but there was definitely an edge to it. Sophia couldn't bring herself to look at him. Just, let me go. Not until you tell me what's wrong. 1 minute we're fine, and the next you're running away. What actually happened? Sophia finally turned to face him, and the anger in her expression made him drop his hand. I know who you are. His face went carefully blank. Aha, Sophia repeated, her voice now rising in volume. That's all you have to say? Uh-huh. You just let me stand there and completely humiliate myself. You actually let me think you were... She couldn't even bring herself to say the word out loud. And all along you were what? Slumming it? Just finding out how the other half lives. James' jaw tightened visibly. That's not fair. Not fair? Not fair? You lied to me. I never lied, James said, his voice hard. You just made an assumption. I simply didn't actually correct it. Sophia laughed bitterly. Oh well, that's so much better. Very ethical of you, really. I was just trying to have one single night where people didn't look at me like I was a walking bank account with legs. James snapped, the careful control he usually maintained slipping for a brief second. One night where someone actually talked to me like I was a person, instead of just another investment opportunity. Is that really so terrible? Sophia shook her head, tears threatening to spill over again. You just don't understand. What don't I understand? That I'm not like you, James? Sophia said, the words coming out sounding harsh and pained. I'm not rich. I'm not sophisticated. I'm exactly what my ex said I was. Someone who just doesn't belong in this world. And you? She gestured vaguely at him. You're so far above me that tonight was probably just a funny story you'll end up telling at your next board meeting. The poor little journalist who actually thought I was a prostitute. James' eyes flashed with something that felt a little dangerous. Is that really what you think of me? I don't actually know what to think of you, Sophia said quietly. I don't know you at all. That's not true. Yes, it is. You lied about who you were. I didn't lie, Sophia, James repeated, his voice sounding rough. I told you to call me James. That is my name. I told you that I found you interesting. That's also true. I held you while we danced, and it felt more real than anything I've experienced in years. Sophia's breath hitched in her throat. Don't what? Don't try to make this into something that it's not. We both know that this was just a game to you. James stepped closer, his very presence feeling almost overwhelming. A game? You actually think this was just some kind of game to me? Sophia held her ground, even though every single instinct she possessed was telling her to just run, and run far, far away. What else would you even call it? James' hand came up, his fingers brushing her cheek with devastating gentleness. I call it the first honest conversation I've actually had in months. I call it the first time someone looked at me and actually saw a person instead of just a dollar sign. I'd call it. He paused, his thumb now tracing her jawline. The best mistake you ever made. Sophia's heart was hammering so hard against her ribs that she was genuinely afraid it might actually burst right out of her chest. This is crazy. Probably, James agreed. His face was so incredibly close to hers now that she could actually feel his breath against her lips. But I haven't actually felt this alive in years, and I'm just not quite ready to let it go yet. Are you? The question just hung there between them, heavy with both possibility and danger in equal measure. Sophia knew that she should say yes, that she should just turn around and walk away from this impossibly beautiful, impossibly complicated man and go straight back to her safe, small, predictable life. But instead, she found herself whispering, "No." James' eyes darkened almost instantly, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing at all like Sophia had actually imagined it would be. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce, consuming, almost like he was trying to prove something to both of them. His hands cupped her face, tilting her head back slightly to deepen the kiss, and Sophia's fingers clenched in the fabric of his jacket, holding on tight like he was the only solid thing in a world that was suddenly spinning out of control. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he murmured. Sophia's eyes flew open in shock. "What? Not like that," he clarified quickly, although his voice was still rough with obvious desire. I really don't want this night to end. Let me make you dinner. Let me actually show you that I'm not the villain you seem to think that I am." Sophia pulled back slightly, her rational mind trying desperately to reassert some kind of control. "This is insane. I don't even know you." "Then get to know me," James said simply. "No pretense, no games, just you and me." Sophia looked at him, really looked at him, the almost careful way that he was holding himself, like he was afraid that she would suddenly bolt if he moved even slightly too quickly, the vulnerability that was flickering in his eyes, and that he was trying so hard to hide. The way that his thumb was unconsciously stroking her cheek, like he just couldn't quite make himself stop touching her. Against every single ounce of common sense that she possessed, Sophia actually nodded. His smile was like the sunrise. His car was already waiting outside. A sleek black vehicle that probably cost more than Sophia's entire annual salary. The driver opened the door for them without comment, his expression carefully neutral, even though his boss had just appeared with a strange woman that he had most definitely not arrived with. The ride to James' penthouse was quiet. He kept her hand clasped tightly in his thumb tracing small patterns against her palm. Sophia just stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, and desperately trying to process exactly what was happening. She had arrived at this party alone and completely invisible. Now she was sitting in a billionaire's car, heading to his home after kissing him in a coat check like some kind of reckless teenager. Her life had officially become completely unrecognizable. The penthouse was everything that Sophia had expected it to be, and yet nothing that she was truly prepared for. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the entire city. Minimalist furniture in shades of gray and white. Original artwork hanging on the walls. Everything was just perfect, pristine, and utterly impersonal. "It looks like a magazine spread," Sophia said before she could even stop herself. James shrugged out of his jacket, casually draping it over the back of a chair. "That's because a magazine actually decorated it. I bought this place 3 years ago, and he'd hired someone to make it look like a home, but it didn't quite work. Did it?" Sophia turned to look at him, a question forming on her lips. "Where do you actually live?" "Here," James responded, but his voice sounded strangely empty, like an echo in a vast space. "Technically, yes, but it certainly doesn't feel like home. More like a ridiculously expensive hotel room." "Then why don't you change it? Make it yours?" He was quiet for a long moment, fingers fumbling with his tie, loosening it a little, but his hands weren't quite steady. "Because that would require actually knowing what I want. And I've spent so much time being what everyone else needs me to be that I'm not even sure I remember who I am anymore." The raw, unfiltered honesty in his voice caused a pang in Sophia's chest, a deep ache of empathy. She walked over to him, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to meet his gaze. "Who do they need you to be?" James let out a laugh, but it was laced with bitterness, a strong, unshakable, and almost frighteningly brilliant sound. "The genius who turned his father's struggling company into a global empire. The golden boy with the Midas touch, the man who never makes mistakes, never shows any weakness, and certainly never admits that sometimes the weight of it all just makes him want to walk away and never look back." Sophia reached up, her hand gently settling over his heart. She could feel it beating fast and hard beneath her palm, a frantic rhythm against her touch. "And who do you want to be?" His hand covered hers, pressing it more firmly against his chest, anchoring her to him. "Right now, just a man who met an interesting woman at a party and desperately wants to know everything about her." Sophia smiled despite herself, a genuine curve of amusement gracing her lips. "Everything? That could take a while." "We have time," James said softly, his voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. The way he was looking at her, with an intensity that seemed to strip away all pretense, made Sophia's breath catch in her throat. It was like she was the only real thing in his perfectly curated, perfectly empty penthouse, the sole point of focus in his universe. Like she actually mattered. "I should probably tell you about myself," Sophia said, wanting to ground things, to bring them back down to earth. "The boring, non-billionaire version." "I want to hear it," James insisted, his gaze unwavering. He gently steered her toward the massive sectional sofa, then surprised her by heading into the kitchen. "You said something about dinner," she called after him, a hint of laughter in her voice. "I did. Can you cook?" James's voice floated back, tinged with amusement and a touch of something else she couldn't quite place. "I can order takeout like a champion," Sophia retorted, a playful grin tugging at her lips. Sophia laughed, some of the tension finally easing from her shoulders. She curled up on the sofa, tucking her feet beneath her. Around her, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, a dazzling display of wealth and ambition. It was surreal, sitting here in this space that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime, waiting for a man she'd mistaken for an escort to order Chinese food. James returned with his phone, sitting close enough that their knees touched, a casual intimacy that sent a shiver down her spine. "Thai or Italian?" "Thai," Sophia said without hesitation. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Good choice. My favorite, too." As he placed the order, Sophia found herself studying his profile. The strong, clean line of his jaw, the slight wave in his dark hair that hinted it would curl wildly if left to its own devices, the faint tension around his eyes that spoke of too many late nights and far too much responsibility. When he hung up, she said, "Tell me something true about you." She clarified, "Something you don't tell people at parties." James was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, "I'm lonely." The words were simple, stark, and brutally honest. Sophia felt them land in her chest like stones, a heavy weight of understanding. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes," James continued, his voice low and almost devoid of emotion. "I have houses on 3 continents. I have employees who depend on me, investors who trust me, competitors who fear me, but I don't have anyone who sees me. Just me. Not the empire or the bank account or the potential merger opportunity." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "Just James." Sophia's throat tightened with a sudden surge of emotion. "I see you." His gray eyes met hers, searching, probing for honesty. "Do you?" "I see a man who was kind to a stranger, even when she insulted him," Sophia said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. "I see someone who danced with me like it mattered. I see someone who's tired of pretending." James reached out, his fingers tangling with hers, his grip surprisingly strong. "Your turn. Tell me something true." Sophia took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I'm scared that I'm always going to be the person who doesn't quite fit. That my ex was right, and I'm just—" She struggled to find the words, the self-deprecating labels that had been ingrained in her over years of criticism. "Not enough. Not smart enough, not ambitious enough, not polished enough. That I'll spend my whole life watching other people live the lives I write about in magazines, never actually experiencing them myself." James's hand tightened on hers, offering silent reassurance. "You're wrong." Sophia laughed shakily, the sound brittle and uncertain. "You don't know that." "Yes," James said fiercely, his eyes burning with conviction. "I do. Because in one night you've been braver than most people are in a lifetime. You walked up to a stranger and asked for help. You stood up to your ex. You called me out when you thought I'd lied to you. That's not someone who isn't enough. That's someone who's extraordinary." Tears pricked at Sophia's eyes, blurring her vision. She blinked them away, trying to regain control, but James had already seen. His thumb brushed gently beneath her eye, catching the moisture there. "Hey," he murmured, his voice soft and soothing. "I'm sorry. It's stupid," she mumbled, embarrassed by her vulnerability. "It's not." He pulled her closer until she was tucked securely against his side, his arm coming around her shoulders, solid and warm. "Talk to me." So she did. Sophia told him about growing up in a small town with big dreams, about working 3 jobs to put herself through journalism school, about the ex-boyfriend who had slowly, methodically convinced her that wanting more was selfish, that being ambitious was unattractive, and that she should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection he deigned to offer. "I believed him," Sophia said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "For so long, I believed him. And even now, even after he's gone, that voice is still in my head, telling me I'm not good enough." James was quiet, his hand stroking slow, comforting patterns on her shoulder. Then he said, "I had a brother." Sophia looked up at him, surprised by the sudden change in topic. "Had? He died 3 years ago. Car accident. He was driving home from one of my company events, exhausted because I'd kept him there until 2 o'clock in the morning, going over contracts. If he'd left earlier, if I hadn't been so demanding, he'd still be alive." "Oh, James," Sophia breathed, her heart aching for him. "It wasn't your fault." James's smile was bitter, a twisted expression of pain. "Everyone says that, but I know the truth. I sacrificed him on the altar of success, just like I've sacrificed everything else. My relationships, my health, any chance at a normal life. And for what? Money. Power. I don't need power. I don't want an empire built on the backs of people I barely see as human anymore." The pain in his voice was visceral, a raw, exposed nerve that resonated deep within Sophia. She turned, kneeling on the sofa so she could face him fully, her expression filled with empathy. Is that why you were at the party alone tonight? He nodded, his gaze fixed on some distant point. My sister Emma, she's on the charity board. She keeps trying to drag me back into the world. Keeps insisting I need to live instead of just existing. But I don't know how anymore. Everyone at those events wants something from me. Everyone has an angle, a pitch, a deal they're trying to close. No one just wants James. Until you, Sophia said softly, her voice barely audible. Until me, he agreed, his eyes finally meeting hers, a flicker of hope igniting within their depths. His hand came up, cupping her face gently. You looked at me and saw an escort. It was the most refreshing thing that's happened to me in years. Sophia laughed despite herself, the sound lighter this time, almost carefree. I'm never going to live that down, am I? Never, James confirmed, a genuine smile spreading across his face. A smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire expression. The doorbell rang, announcing the food's arrival. James answered it, tipping the delivery person generously before bringing the bags to the coffee table. They ate straight from the containers, sitting on the floor like college students, and talked about everything and nothing. About Sophia's dreams of being a serious journalist instead of just covering society events. About James's secret love of old movies and his inability to resist rescuing stray cats, which he promptly donated to animal shelters because his lifestyle couldn't accommodate pets. You rescue cats? Sophia asked, delighted by this unexpected revelation. James had the grace to look embarrassed. I have a reputation to maintain. Can't have anyone knowing I'm soft. I think it's too late for that, Sophia teased, a playful glint in her eyes. You've already shown me you're human. Terrible mistake. James deadpanned, adopting a mock-serious expression. Now I'll have to have you sign an NDA. Sophia threw a spring roll at him, a playful gesture that shattered the pretense of formality. He caught it, took a bite, and grinned, his eyes sparkling with amusement. They finished eating, and James cleared the containers away. When he returned, Sophia was standing at the windows, looking out at the city. The lights seemed to go on forever, a vast galaxy of human ambition and loneliness stretching out before her. James came up behind her, close but not quite touching, respecting her personal space. What are you thinking? Sophia leaned back slightly, allowing herself to rest against his chest, the subtle contact sending a pleasant shiver through her. His arms came around her waist, holding her gently, a comforting embrace. I'm thinking this doesn't feel real. Feels like a dream I'm gonna wake up from. What if that's okay? James murmured against her hair, his breath warm against her scalp. What if we just let it be what it is for tonight and worry about reality tomorrow? Sophia turned in his arms, looking up at him, her gaze searching his. And what is it? His eyes were dark, intense, filled with a longing that mirrored her own. I don't know yet, but I'd like to find out. He kissed her again, slower this time, more deliberate, but no less consuming. Sophia's hand slid up his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. The same frantic rhythm she'd felt earlier. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers, his voice a husky whisper. Stay. Just for tonight. Stay with me. Sophia knew she should say no, should protect her heart, which was already dangerously close to forgetting this was temporary, to succumbing to the allure of this unreal night. But looking into his eyes, seeing the hope and fear and raw desire reflected there, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Okay, she whispered back, the word barely audible. James exhaled, a long, shaky breath like she'd given him something precious, something he desperately needed. He took her hand, leading her through the penthouse. At the entrance to what was clearly the master bedroom, he paused, hesitation flickering across his face. I meant just stay. Sleep here. I'll take the guest room. You don't have to, Sophia started, wanting to reassure him, to let him know she wasn't expecting anything more. I want to, James interrupted, his voice firm and resolute. I want to do this right, whatever this is. Sophia's heart squeezed with tenderness. She reached up, pulling his face down to hers for another kiss. This one was soft, sweet, a promise of something neither of them could quite name yet, a fragile hope for something more. When she pulled back, she smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that lit up her face. Then stay with me, both of us. Just sleep. James searched her face, his eyes questioning, seeking reassurance, then nodded slowly, a sense of relief washing over his features. He found her something to wear, an old college t-shirt that swallowed her frame and made him smile, a sign of normalcy in this extravagant setting. She disappeared into the bathroom to change, taking a moment to stare at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was smudged, her hair was coming loose from its pins, and her eyes were bright with an emotion she was afraid to name. A dangerous cocktail of hope and vulnerability. "What are you doing, Sophie?" she asked her reflection, seeking some semblance of self-awareness. But her reflection offered no answers, only a silent acknowledgement of the chaos that was unfolding. When she emerged, James had changed, too, trading his tailored suit for simple sleep pants and a t-shirt. He looked younger like this, less intimidating, more approachable, more real. They climbed into his massive bed, and after a moment's hesitation, James pulled her close, his arm wrapping around her protectively. Sophia's head found its place on his shoulder, her hand splaying across his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "This is crazy," she murmured, a mix of apprehension and exhilaration in her voice. "Completely," James agreed, his voice a low rumble against her ear. His fingers traced patterns on her back, soothing and hypnotic, chasing away the last vestiges of doubt. But sometimes crazy is good. Sophia woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and a warm presence at her back. For a moment, she was completely disoriented, unsure of where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then memory came flooding back, a rush of sensations and emotions that left her breathless. The party, the mistake, James. She turned carefully, not wanting to wake him, but his eyes were already open, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, more intense. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep, a husky murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. "Morning," Sophia replied, her own voice slightly shaky. "This is awkward, isn't it?" "A little," James admitted, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "But not bad." "Awkward? Just new awkward?" Sophia smiled despite herself, a tentative curve of hope on her lips. "What happens now?" James's hand found hers beneath the covers, his fingers interlacing with hers. "I was hoping you'd have breakfast with me. Real breakfast, not Thai food leftovers." He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "And then maybe we could figure this out." "This?" Sophia asked softly, the word hanging in the air between them, heavy with unspoken questions. "Us." James clarified, his voice barely a whisper. "If there's going to be an us, I'd like there to be. But I understand if last night was just a moment, a fleeting escape from reality. If you want to go back to your life and forget about the weird billionaire who can't cook." Sophia's heart clenched at the vulnerability in his words, the genuine fear that she might reject him. "What if I don't want to forget?" "Then don't," James said simply, his gray eyes locking onto hers, unwavering in their intensity. "I know this is fast. I know it's complicated. But Sophia, I haven't felt like this in." He paused, searching for the right words, the ones that could adequately convey the depth of his emotions. "I'm not sure I've ever felt like this." "Like what?" "Like myself. Like I can breathe. Like there's something in my life worth getting out of bed for besides obligations and expectations." Sophia leaned in, closing the distance between them, and kissed him softly, a gentle promise of what could be. "Then let's have breakfast." James's smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds, chasing away the shadows and illuminating his entire face. They made breakfast together, or rather, Sophia made breakfast while James provided enthusiastic but largely unhelpful commentary. His presence a constant source of amusement and warmth. He kept finding excuses to touch her, his hand brushing her waist as he reached past her for a pan, his fingers grazing hers as she handed him a spatula. It felt domestic, comfortable, and surprisingly right in a way that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. They were halfway through eggs and toast when James's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and grimaced, a shadow of annoyance crossing his features. I have to take this. It's my sister. Sophia nodded, understanding the demands of his life, and James stepped away, his voice dropping to a murmur she couldn't quite hear. But she could see his face through the doorway, and she watched as his expression shifted, subtly at first, from relaxed to tense to something that looked almost like panic. When he returned, the easy warmth from earlier was gone, replaced by a guarded look that sent a chill down Sophia's spine. What's wrong? Sophia asked, her voice filled with concern. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration and unease. That was Emma. She saw us at the party last night. Apparently, it's already in the society pages. Woman mysteriously appears with reclusive billionaire James Ashford. Speculation runs wild. Sophia's stomach dropped, a sickening lurch of dread. Oh God! It's fine, James said quickly, trying to reassure her, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Or it will be. Emma just wanted to warn me that the press might be sniffing around. She also... He paused, hesitating, as if reluctant to deliver the next piece of information. Wanted to know who you are and if I've lost my mind. Have you lost your mind? Sophia asked, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. James looked at her, his gaze intense and unwavering, and something fierce and tender crossed his face. A look that both thrilled and frightened her. Probably, but I don't want to find it again. The words should have reassured her, should have calmed her fears, but Sophia couldn't shake the growing sense of unease, the feeling that she was stepping into a world she didn't understand, a world that could potentially swallow her whole. This was real now, not just a fleeting moment at a party or a magical night in a beautiful penthouse. This was her face in the newspapers, speculation about who she was and what she wanted from James Ashford. I should go, Sophia said abruptly, the words tumbling out before she could fully process them. What? Why? James asked, his voice laced with confusion and a hint of hurt. Because this is your life, James. Photographers and society pages and people analyzing every move you make. I'm not built for that. I'm just... She gestured helplessly at herself, searching for the right words to explain her inadequacies. Me. And I'm just me, James said, crossing to her, his voice filled with determination. Sophia, I don't care about the press. I don't care what people think. Care about you. You barely know me, Sophia protested, her voice rising slightly in panic. Then let me get to know you, James pleaded, his eyes searching hers. Please give us a real chance. Not just one night. A real chance. Sophia wanted to, God. She wanted to so badly it hurt. But fear was climbing up her throat, choking her, whispering all the ways this could go wrong, the potential for heartbreak and humiliation. What if your world chews me up and spits me out? What if people think I'm a gold digger or a social climber? What if I can't handle it, and I disappoint you? Then we'll figure it out together, James said firmly, his voice unwavering. But Sophia, don't let fear make this decision. Don't let the bastard in your head that sounds like your ex win. His words hit her like cold water, snapping her back to reality. He was right. This was Derek's voice, still echoing in her mind, telling her she wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't enough, period. Okay, she said quietly, the word barely audible, a fragile agreement in the face of overwhelming fear. Okay, James repeated, seeking confirmation, his expression etched with hope. Okay, Sophia repeated, her voice stronger now, more resolute. Let's try. Let's really try. James's entire face transformed, the tension melting away, replaced by a radiant smile that lit up his eyes. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, a desperate embrace that conveyed the depth of his relief. Thank you, he murmured against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. I promise I'll make this worth it. Over the next few weeks, Sophia learned what it truly meant to date a billionaire, to step into a world of wealth and privilege and relentless public scrutiny. There were photographers camped outside her apartment, their lenses constantly trained on her, capturing every move. There were articles dissecting her background, her job, her clothes, her presumed motivations, each piece meticulously analyzed and judged. There were people online who called her a nobody, a gold digger, a social climber using James for his money, their words venomous and cruel. It was brutal and invasive and exactly as bad as she'd feared, a constant assault on her confidence and self-worth. But there was also James, who showed up at her door with coffee when she'd had a bad day. His presence a comforting anchor in the storm. James, who read her articles and gave thoughtful feedback, genuinely interested in her work and her passions. James, who held her hand in public despite the cameras, who kissed her forehead and told her she was brave, defying the expectations of his world. James, who slowly, carefully opened up about his own fears and insecurities, revealing the vulnerable man beneath the polished facade. They were having dinner at a quiet restaurant, tucked into a corner booth away from prying eyes, when James said, "I need to tell you something." Sophia's heart stuttered, a sudden wave of anxiety washing over her. "That sounds ominous." "It's about the night we met," James said, his expression serious. "When you asked me to pretend to be your date." "Yes," Sophia replied, her voice barely a whisper, bracing herself for whatever was coming. "I'd been planning to leave," James admitted, his gaze fixed on his hands. "The party, the company, all of it. I was going to sell everything and disappear. Just walk away from the life everyone expected me to live." Sophia set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "What stopped you?" "You," James said simply, his eyes finally meeting hers, filled with a raw honesty that made her breath catch in her throat. "You walked up to me and asked for help, and for the first time in months I felt useful. Not as a bank account or a business asset, just as a person who could do something kind for someone else. I didn't save you that night, Sophia. You saved me." Sophia's eyes burned with unshed tears, a wave of emotion washing over her. "James, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep doing it," James said, his hand finding hers across the table, his fingers interlacing with hers, offering silent support. "Keep reminding me that there's more to life than board meetings and stock prices. Keep showing me what it means to actually live." "I think we're doing that for each other," Sophia said softly, her voice filled with emotion. His smile was heartbreaking in its vulnerability, a glimpse of the wounded soul beneath the confident exterior. "Yeah, we are." They finished dinner and walked along the waterfront, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt and the sound of distant waves. It was late enough that most of the tourists had gone home, leaving the path relatively empty, a welcome respite from the crowds and the cameras. James had his arm around Sophia's shoulders, holding her close, and she was tucked against his side, feeling safe and protected. And for the first time in weeks, no one was photographing them or shouting questions, a brief moment of peace and normalcy. "This is nice," Sophia said, savoring the quiet moment. Just being," James agreed, his voice a low rumble against her ear. He stopped, turning her to face him, his hands gently framing her face. The city lights reflected in his gray eyes, creating a mesmerizing effect. "Sophia, I know this hasn't been easy. I know my world is complicated and intrusive. If you want out, if it's too much, I'll understand." "Do you want me to want out?" Sophia asked quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. "God, no," James said fervently, his grip tightening on her hands. "I'm terrified every day that you're going to wake up and realize this isn't worth it, that I'm not worth it." "Then stop worrying," Sophia said, her voice filled with conviction. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands, her thumbs gently stroking his cheekbones. "Yes, your world is complicated. Yes, it's been hard. But James, you're worth it. You're worth every article and every photograph and every person who thinks they know what this is because they don't. Only we do." James kissed her then, a deep and desperate kiss, full of relief and pent-up emotion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice a husky whisper. "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, precious and terrifying, a declaration that changed everything. Sophia's heart felt too big for her chest, threatening to burst from the force of her emotions. "Good," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Because I'm falling in love with you, too." They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, their silence a testament to the depth of their connection, while the city moved around them, oblivious to the profound shift that had just occurred in their lives. Then James's phone rang, shattering the fragile peace. He groaned, a sound of resignation and annoyance. "I'm sorry, I have to check. It might be Emma." Sophia nodded, understanding the demands of his life, and stepped back to give him privacy. But as James answered, his face went pale, his expression shifting from annoyance to shock. "What? When?" He was already moving, pulling Sophia along with him, his urgency sending a jolt of fear through her. "I'm on my way." In the car, James was tense and silent, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Sophia didn't push him, sensing his distress, and just held his hand, offering silent support. Finally, he said, "That was my head of security. Someone leaked a rumor that we're engaged. Not just tabloid speculation. An actual fabricated announcement with fake quotes from both of us. It's everywhere." Sophia felt cold, a chill that went straight to her bones. Why would someone do that? James's jaw was tight with barely suppressed anger. "To force my hand. If I deny it, the story becomes, why won't James Ashford commit? If I don't deny it, I'm trapped in a lie. Either way, it's a power play. But who would?" Sophia started, her mind reeling, trying to make sense of the situation. "Derek," James said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your ex." The security team traced the leak to him. "Apparently, he's been feeding stories to the tabloids about you for weeks, trying to control the narrative, make you look like a social climber, so when the relationship falls apart, he can swoop back in as the 'I told you so.'" Sophia felt sick, the betrayal and manipulation leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. "He's that vindictive?" James glanced at her, his eyes dark with a mixture of anger and concern. "He's that scared. Scared you moved on. Scared you're happier without him. Scared that you've proven everything he said about you was a lie." They pulled up to James's building, the sleek modern structure a stark reminder of the world she had stepped into. Upstairs, his team was already assembled in his home office, a group of high-powered professionals ready to deal with the crisis. Lawyers, publicists, security consultants, their faces grim, their expressions betraying the gravity of the situation. The situation was worse than Sophia had imagined. Derek hadn't just leaked the engagement rumor. He'd fabricated text messages suggesting Sophia had been planning to trap James from the beginning, meticulously crafting a false narrative to paint her as a manipulative gold digger. He'd found old college friends willing to say she'd always been a social climber, eager to profit from her connection to wealth and power. He'd built an entire narrative designed to destroy her credibility and James's reputation, a carefully orchestrated campaign of lies and deceit. "We need to issue a statement," one of the lawyers said, his voice cold and clinical. "Deny everything, paint her as the villain, and move on. Clean break." "No," James said flatly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Everyone turned to look at him, surprised by his vehemence. "No," he repeated, his gaze unwavering. "We're not throwing Sophia under the bus to save my reputation." "Then what do you suggest?" the publicist asked, her tone laced with skepticism. "We tell the truth," James said, his eyes locking onto Sophia's, offering her silent reassurance. "All of it. How we met, why we were together that first night, everything." The room erupted in protests, a cacophony of voices raising objections and offering alternative solutions. "That will make you both look ridiculous," someone said, aghast at the potential damage to his image. "It will undermine your authority," said another, concerned about the impact on his business dealings. "It will feed the narrative that she's unsophisticated, and you're impulsive." added a third, warning of the long-term consequences. James held up a hand, silencing them all, his expression resolute. Or it will show that we're human, that we met in an unconventional way and chose each other anyway, that the world can think what it wants, but this is real. He turned to Sophia, his eyes filled with vulnerability and unwavering support. If you're okay with that, if you're willing to let me tell everyone that you mistook me for an escort, and I fell for you anyway. Sophia looked at him, this man who was willing to make himself vulnerable, to risk his carefully constructed image to protect her, to stand by her side in the face of overwhelming opposition. Then she looked at the assembled team, at their expensive suits and their calculating expressions, and their certainty that she wasn't worth the trouble, that she was nothing more than a liability. She thought about Derek, about all the times he'd made her feel small and unworthy, about all the voices in her head that told her she didn't deserve this, didn't deserve James, didn't deserve to be happy. And she thought about what James had said, his words echoing in her mind. Don't let fear make this decision. Yes, Sophia said clearly, her voice ringing with conviction. Let's tell the truth. The publicist looked like she might faint, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The lawyers started arguing, their voices rising in protest, but James was smiling, that real smile that transformed his whole face, the one Sophia had come to treasure, the one that revealed the kind, compassionate man beneath the billionaire facade. They worked through the night, crafting a statement that was honest without being naive, vulnerable without being weak, a testament to their unconventional love story. By dawn, they had something that felt right, something that reflected the truth of their connection, something that could withstand the scrutiny of the world. James Ashford and Sophia Mitchell's meeting at a charity gala was, to put it mildly, unconventional. Their relationship, born from that unusual encounter, had been under a microscope ever since. While rumors of an engagement were a bit jumped up, they were, in fact, seriously committed to exploring their connection away from prying eyes. They simply asked for respect and privacy as they figured things out together. Their statement wasn't gushy, nor was it defensive. No one was thrown under the bus, and there were no excuses. It was simply the unvarnished truth. The internet, predictably, went nuts when they released it. Half the comments were supportive, praising their honesty and labeling them relationship goals. The other half was critical, accusing them of airing their dirty laundry and questioning Sophia's motives. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to turn. Other people started sharing their own stories of unconventional beginnings. The narrative shifted from judgment to curiosity, eventually landing on acceptance. Derek, unsurprisingly, didn't handle any of this well. He doubled down, granting interviews and claiming Sophia had always been manipulative. But the more he talked, the more desperate and frankly pathetic he seemed. Eventually, his own friends started backing away, unwilling to be associated with his increasingly unhinged behavior. Sophia, meanwhile, barely even registered it. She was too busy actually living her life. She got a well-deserved promotion at work, her honest and insightful coverage of the charity gala, and its aftermath finally earning her the recognition she deserved. She moved out of her cramped little apartment and into a place that finally felt like home. Not because it was dripping in luxury, but simply because it was hers. And she fell even harder for James. 3 months into their relationship, they had their first real knockdown, drag-out fight. It was about something utterly ridiculous. Sophia couldn't even remember what, specifically, but it escalated with alarming speed. Voices were raised, doors were slammed with considerable force. Sophia ended up crying in the bathroom while James paced the living room like a restless tiger. But unlike with Derek, who would have let the fight fester for days, using it as ammunition for future battles, James knocked on the bathroom door within the hour. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice muffled by the wood. "I'm being an idiot, and I feel like I'm falling apart without you on the other side of this door. Please come out so we can fix this." Sophia opened the door, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm sorry, too." They embraced for what felt like an eternity, each unsure of who was supporting whom. Then James broke the silence. "I'm not good at this," he confessed. "At relationships, at being vulnerable, at letting someone see me at my absolute worst. But I really want to be good at it with you. So, teach me, how do we fight without destroying each other? We remember that we're on the same team, Sophia said softly. We say what we actually mean instead of saying the thing we think will hurt the most. We cool down before we try to talk things through. And we forgive. James kissed her forehead. Okay, we can do that. And they did. The fights didn't magically disappear, because life isn't a fairy tale and they were both stubborn, complicated people. But they learned to fight fair, to apologize sincerely, to choose each other even when it was the hardest thing to do. 6 months after their first meeting, James took Sophia back to the Grand Meridian Hotel, to the very same ballroom where she'd mistaken him for an escort and unintentionally changed the course of both their lives. Why are we here? Sophia asked as they walked into the deserted space. James simply led her to the center of the dance floor. The room was empty. No event scheduled that night, just them and the echoing silence. The lights were dimmed, but James had clearly arranged for the chandeliers to be illuminated, and they sparkled like a sky full of stars. Do you remember what I said that night? James asked, his voice low. Sophia searched her memory. You said a lot of things. I said I hadn't felt alive in years, James reminded her. I said you made me feel like I could actually breathe again. I said I didn't even know who I was anymore because I'd spent so long just being what everyone else expected me to be. Sophia nodded, her throat suddenly tight. All of that was true, James said, his gaze unwavering. But what I didn't say, what I didn't even know yet, was that you weren't just reminding me how to live. You were giving me a reason to. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. James, she breathed. 6 months ago, you walked up to me and asked me to pretend, James said. His voice was remarkably steady, but his hands were shaking just a bit. You thought I was someone I wasn't. And somehow that was exactly what I needed. Someone who could see past the empire and the reputation and just see a man. Someone brave enough to ask for help, and honest enough to call me out when I was wrong. Someone who could love me not in spite of my flaws, but actually including them. He opened the box, revealing a ring. It was simple and elegant. A single, dazzling diamond that caught the light from the chandeliers. I'm not asking you to pretend anymore, James said. I'm asking you to make this real. To build a life with me, arguments and all. To be my partner, my home, my reason to actually get out of bed in the morning. Sophia Mitchell, will you marry me? Tears streamed down Sophia's face. She thought about the lost girl who'd stood in this very room 6 months before, feeling alone and invisible, convinced she wasn't good enough. She thought about all the ways James had shown her that those fears were lies, that she was more than enough, that she was extraordinary. She thought about the life they'd built together, messy and complicated and utterly perfect. Yes, Sophia said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, of course, yes. James slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like tears and joy and the promise of forever. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, James said, I have a confession to make. What? Spill it. I'm still terrible at pretending. This has been real from the moment you walked up to me. I think I actually fell in love with you when you offered to pay my hourly rate. Sophia burst out laughing. That's got to be the worst meet-cute story in history. I know, James grinned. But it's ours. They danced in the empty ballroom, with no music except for the sound of their own heartbeats. No audience, just each other. And Sophia realized that 6 months ago she'd been terrified of not being enough, of not belonging. Now, she finally understood that belonging wasn't about squeezing yourself into someone else's world. It was about finding someone who wanted to build an entirely new world with you. One where mistakes could become miracles, where loneliness could blossom into love, and where two people could see past the surface to the messy, complicated truth underneath. A truth that was absolutely worth fighting for. Their wedding was small, intimate, everything the charity gala hadn't been. Just close friends and family gathered in a beautiful garden, with Emma as Sophia's maid of honor and James's best friend from college standing by his side as best man. Sophia wore a simple white dress that made her look radiant. James wore a suit that didn't feel like armor. And they wrote their own vows. "I promise to always see you," Sophia said, her voice filled with emotion. Not the CEO or the empire or the bank account. Just James. Just the man who rescues stray cats and can't cook but tries anyway. The man who holds me when I'm scared and believes in me when I don't believe in myself. The man who taught me that being enough starts with believing that I already am. "I promise to always choose you," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even when it's hard, even when the world has opinions, even when I'm scared of how much I need you. You walked into my life when I was ready to give up on everything. And you gave me a reason to stay. You gave me hope. You gave me a home." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden when they kissed, sealing promises they both intended to keep. Everyone cheered. At the reception, Derek actually tried to crash the party. Security stopped him at the gate, but Sophia saw him through the fence. For a fleeting moment, she felt a flicker of the old fear. Then James took her hand. "You okay?" James asked quietly, his eyes searching hers. Sophia looked at her ex-boyfriend, at the bitterness and anger etched onto his face, and felt nothing but pity. She turned to her husband, the man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her anyway. "I'm perfect," she said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Derek eventually left, and Sophia didn't give him another thought. The reception continued, filled with laughter and love and some truly terrible dancing. James' sister, Emma, gave a toast that made everyone cry, then laugh when she revealed that she'd been trying to set James up for years, and he'd turned down every single woman she'd suggested. Apparently, all it took was someone mistaking him for a prostitute, Emma said, grinning mischievously. Who knew that was the key? Sophia's face turned crimson, but she was laughing, too. James pulled her close, whispering in her ear, "Best mistake of my life." "Mine too," Sophia whispered back. They honeymooned in Scotland, in a tiny cottage far away from the prying eyes of cameras and tabloids and the suffocating weight of expectations. They hiked through the breathtaking highlands, got caught in several rainstorms that left them soaked to the bone, and spent long, cozy evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing at all. One night, curled up together under a thick quilt, James said, "I want to do something with the company, something that actually matters." Sophia turned to look at him, intrigued. "Like what?" "I want to start a foundation," James said, his voice earnest. "For kids from backgrounds like yours. Scholarships, mentorship programs, resources to help them build careers in fields they never even thought were accessible to them. I want to use this ridiculous amount of money to actually change lives, instead of just accumulating more of it." Sophia's heart swelled with pride and love. "That's incredible." James smiled, recognizing the knowing tone in her voice. "But I want you to run it with me. You know what it's like to fight for opportunities, to feel like you don't belong. Your voice, your perspective. That's what will make this real instead of just another rich person's tax write-off." Sophia thought about her younger self, struggling to afford textbooks and juggling 3 part-time jobs just to make ends meet. She thought about all the kids out there right now who were just as smart, just as driven, but who didn't have the resources or the connections to succeed. "Yes," she said firmly. "Let's do it." They launched the Ashford Opportunity Initiative a year later. It started small, with just a handful of scholarships and one modest mentorship program. But word spread quickly. Within 3 years, they were funding hundreds of students annually, providing not just financial support, but also guidance, connections, and the unwavering belief that they belonged in rooms they'd always been told were off-limits. Sophia threw herself into the work with a passion that sometimes worried James. More than once, he found her asleep at her desk, surrounded by grant applications and program proposals. "Love," James would say gently, shaking her awake. "You're going to burn yourself out." "I can't," Sophia would insist, her voice thick with exhaustion. "There's just too much to do. Too many kids who need this, and I can't let them down." "You won't," James assured her. "But you also can't help them if you run yourself into the ground. Come to bed. We'll save the world tomorrow." It became their routine. James watching over Sophia, making sure she ate and slept and occasionally took a break. Sophia pushing James to be more than just the cold, calculating CEO, to use his influence for good, to always remember why they'd started this in the first place. They balanced each other, challenged each other, and grew together in ways they never could have imagined. On their 5th anniversary, they stood in the ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel again, but this time it was filled with scholarship recipients, mentors, and generous donors. The Ashford Opportunity Initiative's annual gala had become one of the most prestigious charity events in the city. Sophia watched the bright young people mingling with industry leaders and thought about how far they'd all come. James came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured in her ear. Sophia leaned back against him, a sense of contentment washing over her. "I'm thinking about the girl who walked into this room 5 years ago," she said softly. "The one who thought she had to pretend to be someone else just to matter." "And," James prompted gently, "and I'm so grateful she was brave enough to make that mistake," Sophia said, smiling. "Because it led to this, to us, to all of them." She nodded toward the scholarship recipients. "To a life I never even dreamed I deserved, but somehow got anyway." "You always deserved it," James said softly. "You just needed someone to reflect it back to you until you could finally see it for yourself." Sophia turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had once been a stranger she'd propositioned at a party. The man who had become her husband, her partner, her home. "I love you," she said, her voice full of tenderness. "I love you too," James replied, his eyes shining with love. "Always." They danced just like they had that very first night. But everything was different now. No pretense, no fear. Just two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of ways and built something truly extraordinary from a moment of mistaken identity. Later, after the gala had ended and the guests had all gone home, they stood on the balcony overlooking the glittering city. The lights sparkled like a million scattered diamonds, each one representing a life, a story, a possibility. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't mistaken you for an escort?" Sophia asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "All the time," James admitted, his voice thoughtful. "I think I would have left that party alone, would have sold the company, would have disappeared completely, would have never known what I was missing. And now I know exactly what I would have been missing," James said, pulling her closer. "Everything." Sophia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. They stood there for a long time, watching the city breathe below them, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the mistake that had changed everything. Because sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we get things wrong, from the chances we take when we're scared, from the people who see past our imperfections to the beautiful truth underneath. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person you mistake for someone else turns out to be exactly the person you needed all along. 10 years after that fateful night, Sophia stood in the same ballroom once again. But this time, she wasn't alone or invisible. She was presenting the Ashford Opportunity Initiative's annual impact report to a room full of people who once would have intimidated her beyond belief. The foundation had grown beyond anything she and James had ever imagined. They'd funded over 5,000 scholarships, placed graduates in top companies across every industry, and created a vast and supportive network that extended far beyond mere financial assistance. But even more meaningful than the impressive numbers were the individual stories. Like Maya, their very first scholarship recipient, who had risen from a struggling single-parent household to become a dedicated doctor who now volunteered her time at free clinics. Like David, who'd used his scholarship to study engineering and now worked for a non-profit organization bringing clean, sustainable water solutions to developing countries. Like Jasmine, who had become a passionate teacher and started her own mentorship program in her old neighborhood. These weren't just simple success stories. They were living proof that when you gave people a chance, when you genuinely believed in them and provided them with the resources and the unwavering support they needed, and when you refused to let them believe they weren't good enough, extraordinary things could and would happen. As Sophia finished her presentation, the room erupted in thunderous applause. She caught James's eye from his seat in the front row. He was looking at her the same way he had that very first night, like she was the most fascinating person in the entire room, like she truly mattered. After the event, they walked home through the city streets, hand in hand. They could have easily taken the chauffeured car, but they both preferred this, the quiet intimacy of simply moving through the world together, side by side. "I'm so incredibly proud of you," James said, squeezing her hand. "Of us?" Sophia gently corrected him. "We built this together every step of the way." James stopped walking, turning to face her directly. The soft glow of a nearby street light cast intriguing shadows across his face, highlighting the subtle lines that 10 years had etched there. They made him even more handsome, Sophia thought, somehow more real. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" James asked, his voice low and intimate. "Which part?" "I said a lot of questionable things. The part where you said you needed people to think you were with someone like me," James clarified. "Someone who belonged." Sophia winced slightly, a hint of embarrassment flickering across her face. "I was so stupid and insecure back then." "No," James said firmly, his gaze unwavering. "You were honest. And the truth is, I needed you just as much, if not more. I needed someone who could see past the carefully constructed performance to the real person underneath. Someone who could call me James instead of Mr. Ashford. Someone who could love me, not for what I could provide, but for who I truly was. We saved each other, didn't we?" Sophia said softly, her eyes glistening with tears. "We did," James agreed, his voice full of tenderness. "And we're still doing it, every single day." They continued their walk, passing by the familiar places that had become cherished landmarks in their shared story. The cozy little Italian restaurant where they'd had their first proper date. The sprawling park where James had first confessed his love. The quirky independent bookstore where they'd spent a rainy Sunday afternoon engaged in a spirited debate about whether or not happy endings were actually realistic. "Look at us," Sophia said, gesturing around at their surroundings. "We actually got our happy ending." James squeezed her hand reassuringly. "This isn't an ending, my love. It's just a chapter. There's still so much more ahead of us. More kids to help, more impact to make, more life to live together side by side." Sophia smiled, her heart brimming with happiness. "Always the optimist, aren't you?" "Only since I met you," James confessed, his eyes twinkling mischievously. "Before that, I was a hardened cynic who thought happiness was just a cleverly marketed myth sold to people who didn't know any better. And now I know that happiness is real. It's just not what I always thought it would be. It's not a destination to reach or a state of permanent bliss to maintain. It's a choice. It's choosing to build something truly meaningful with someone you love. It's choosing to wake up every day and strive to be a little bit better, to do a little bit more good in the world. It's choosing each other, even when it's incredibly hard." They finally reached their charming brownstone, the comfortable home they'd purchased 3 years ago, when their sleek, modern penthouse had started to feel a bit too much like a sterile museum. This place was clearly lived in and well-loved, filled with overflowing bookshelves, framed photographs that captured countless memories, and an unmistakable sense of warmth and belonging. Inside, they kicked off their shoes and gratefully collapsed onto the plush living room couch. Sophia instinctively curled up against James, who wrapped his arm around her shoulders without even thinking. The television flickered on, broadcasting some mindless late-night show that neither of them was really paying attention to. "Do you ever regret it?" Sophia asked suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. James looked down at her, his brow furrowed in gentle concern. "Regret what, sweetheart?" "All of it," she said, her eyes searching his. "The constant scrutiny, the seemingly endless challenges, the way our entire relationship has been lived under a microscope. How I dragged you headfirst into my chaotic world that first night." James was silent for a long moment, carefully considering his response. Then he said, "That very first night when you unexpectedly walked up to me, I was actively planning my exit strategy, not just from the stifling party, but from my entire life as I knew it. I was seriously contemplating liquidating my assets, setting up ironclad trusts for my family, and simply disappearing. Maybe moving to some remote island where no one knew who I was or what I was worth. Where I could finally just be James, whoever that truly was. What stopped you? Sophia asked, holding her breath. You stopped me, James said, his voice filled with love and sincerity. You looked at me like I was a human being, not a financial portfolio. You asked me for help, something that no one had done in years because everyone simply assumed I had everything all figured out. And when we danced, when you let me hold you close, I remembered what it actually felt like to be human, to genuinely connect with another person. So no, my love, I don't regret a single second. Not the intrusive photographers, not the gossiping tabloids, not even the most difficult challenges that we've faced together, because all of it, every single moment, has inevitably led to this extraordinary life that actually matters. Sophia's eyes burned with unshed tears. How do you always know exactly the right thing to say? She whispered, reaching up to gently cup his face in her hands. I honestly don't, James admitted, his expression softening. Most of the time, I'm just fumbling around in the dark, desperately hoping that I don't somehow screw this up. But with you, it's simply easier. You make me want to be honest instead of perfect, to be vulnerable instead of guarded. Sophia's fingers tightened on his face, her gaze intense. You're perfect to me, James. I'm really, truly not, James said with a self-deprecating smile. Remember the time I tried to surprise you with breakfast in bed and accidentally set off the smoke alarm, nearly burning down the entire apartment? Or when I mistakenly donated your favorite vintage sweater to Goodwill? Or when I... Okay. Sophia interrupted, laughing. I get your point. You're beautifully imperfect, just like me. Exactly like you, James agreed, his eyes twinkling. That's precisely why this works so well. We're both a little bit broken, a little bit lost, constantly figuring things out as we go. But we're doing it together, side by side, hand in hand. They settled into a comfortable, companionable silence, watching the dazzling city lights twinkle through their window. After a while, James spoke again, his voice thoughtful. You know what I sometimes find myself thinking about? What? Sophia asked, nuzzling her face against his chest. That mortifying moment when you realized I wasn't actually a professional escort? The look on your face was a mixture of pure horror and utter mortification. Sophia groaned dramatically, burying her face deeper against his chest. Do we really have to relive this embarrassing moment yet again? Always, James said cheerfully, his voice full of amusement. It's my absolute favorite story to tell. I will never, ever let you live that down, my love. You're absolutely terrible, Sophia muttered playfully, but she was smiling nonetheless. I know, James said, kissing the top of her head. But you love me anyway. I really, really do, Sophia said, her voice full of affection. Against all logical odds and despite my better judgment, I really, truly do love you. Good, James said, kissing her forehead tenderly. Because I love you too, Sophia. More than I ever thought possible, more than I even knew I was capable of feeling. You taught me how to love, how to truly live, and how to embrace all the beautiful imperfections that make us who we are. They stayed there until the early hours of the morning, talking and laughing and dreaming about their shared future. And when they finally went to bed, tangled together in soft, well-worn sheets that smelled faintly of lavender, Sophia thought about how far they traveled together. From complete strangers to tentative lovers to devoted partners, to a powerful team that was actively changing countless lives for the better. It wasn't the idealized fairy tale she'd dreamed of as a little girl, but it was infinitely better because it was undeniably real, messy, and imperfectly perfect.